Hello, everyone. This is Ed Hart speaking. A year ago, Ann and I joined friends Joan and Rick Schmidt on a wonderful vacation to Egypt, and we would like to share that adventure with all of you. Most of us know something about Egypt's ancient history, but this is also a country trying to find a future for itself in a fast-changing world. So, in addition to talking about the historic aspects of Egypt, I will share some thoughts on the future I believe that nation is facing. To help talk about our trip, I'm going to use the works of a remarkable artist who captured the region so well in drawings, many years before the camera was invented. You've probably seen his works, but you may not have known who he was. Egypt has always been about the Nile. Egypt is a desert split by one of the world's major rivers. Look at that map. 95% of the country's population lives within walking distance of the Nile's waters. It is the lifeblood of that region. It always has been. So no surprise, all the historic sites of Egypt are on the shores of the Nile and thus easy to reach by riverboat. And the boat is a very comfortable and safe way to travel in this crowded part of the world. So we started in Cairo, staying at a resort next door to the pyramids of Giza. After a couple days at Giza and the famous Egyptian Museum in Cairo, we flew to Luxor, where we toured the many historic sites in that region. We then boarded our riverboat to continue upriver for a few days to Aswan. From Aswan, we then flew to Abu Simbel before flying back to Cairo. The logistics were excellent, and the entire tour was well run by Abercrombie and Kent. A&K has been a mainstay tour company in Egypt for Western travelers for many decades. We were comfortable and felt secure the whole time. As most of you know, a tour guide can make or break a historic tour. We really lucked out. A&K has the best guides, but we got the best of the best. Abdul Alamed is a noted Egyptologist with several books to his credit, and he's a fine gentleman too. I don't know that you could be so lucky to get him, but if you do, lucky you. The river boats are necessarily compact, but they made good use of the many decks of the boat. Our rooms were relatively large, and the entertainment was very nice. Food was great. One night featured an Egyptian-themed party that was great fun. The boat uses night hours to travel from site to site, but there's also plenty of daylight cruising to show off the many lovely sights along the Nile. I've yet to figure out why the Aga Khan, the 48th Imam of Indian Muslims, is buried here, but he picked a nice spot. Given that the entire population of Egypt lives tightly along the river, traveling on the river itself keeps the tourists away from the masses. The risk to everyone is far lower in doing this. Ann and I are blowing through our retirement savings, as you probably know, and we don't like to slum. With A&K, there's no slumming allowed. All of our accommodations were excellent, top-notch. For anyone who's studied or even just dipped into Egypt's long history, you know how complex it is. Researchers have been able to construct a comprehensive timeline of pharaohs and events, but I recommend you leave that to the experts and enjoy each episode on its own. Unless you happen to be an Egyptologist yourself, of course. It's very difficult to grasp how old these places are. 5,000 years is a long time. That's 20 times older than the U.S. Relatively speaking, we just got here. All the societies we explored on this trip rose and fell before the birth of Christ and before the arrival of Islam, too. Notice where PEO fits on this timeline? Just another newbie. Egypt created government on a grand scale, complete with an extensive bureaucracy. Yes, they even had their equivalent of the IRS to collect taxes. I suppose one of the definitions of civilization is the ability to record history. Egypt was the first to do that, and the writing is simply beautiful. We will talk a little bit about the religion of the area, and like any organized society, citizens fell into class ranges. As Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king, but every society ends up with a head, and in Egypt it was called the pharaoh or king. People were pretty much born into their station in life and expected to do that role for as long as they lived. And notice government officials just below the pharaoh, these are the guys who really ran the show. backed up by the military, of course. Yes, it looks a lot like a modern dictatorship. An important note, although this old graphic refers to the lowest rung as slaves, the Egyptian Tourism Board wants them to be called workers. I'm not sure how the workers would have felt about that. It's hard to look at all the carvings we saw on this trip without giving thought to how long it must have taken to create something like this. It's an incredible record of a battle along the Nile. See the men climbing ladders? See the archers? See the fish in the water? Look at the enemies falling and being marched into captivity. We see the invaders' horses, too, although horses did not fare well in Egypt. Camels were better suited to the hot climate. At the Valley of the Kings, the artists were busy at work creating another chamber in the tomb of Seti I, but Seti died before completion, so the room was never finished. Seti was entombed, and the tomb was sealed for thousands of years. The Egyptian Department of Antiquities has created an outstanding series of exhibits in the Valley of the Kings. And I hope you go see them someday. I guarantee it'll be a great treat for you. The Egyptians seemed to grasp the importance of recording history, but the ability to record events was also useful in maintaining power as well as securing a place in the afterlife. The sheer number of hieroglyphics at places like Edfu will amaze you. The Egyptian culture was remarkably advanced, yet they somehow lost their way as the centuries wore on. They were overrun by many invaders, as you probably know, and of course Islam arrived 1400 years ago. The Rosetta Stone seems to have been created by someone who knew that a day would come when Egypt's ancient history would need translation for future civilizations to understand. That someone created this fantastic translator over 2200 years ago, and it has proved crucial to unraveling the story of ancient Egypt. The stone was found built into a low wall in the Nile Delta, being used simply as a building block. The British recognized its importance and had it shipped to England in 1802. It then became the center of much research and ultimately yielded the translation from hieroglyphics to modern languages. Here's a close-up of the Rosetta Stone I took many years ago on a trip to London. Historians say it was once part of a much larger piece, a tablet if you will, that may have looked like this. A big question, do you think it should be shipped back to Egypt? The new Egyptian Museum wants it, but remember when the Islamic fundamentalist group, the Taliban, destroyed thousands of historic religious pieces in Iraq several decades ago? The British have an argument when it comes to securing historic artifacts. Every culture in history had leaders and followers. Back to Mel Brooks, being Pharaoh was a good gig. I'm not sure how early Egyptian masses felt about all this, but the range of wealth was probably not a lot different than we see today across the globe, like in India or Africa or even our inner cities here in the U.S. But Egypt was an attractive land to invade also, flat open territories and great farmland, so Egypt was invaded and occupied many times. After World War II, the British influence ended, and Egypt has been wandering into an uncertain future ever since. Eventually, early Egyptians had a god for everything, from rivers and trees to seeds and insects. I'm sure that no pharaoh could remember them all, but much of ancient Egypt's art is filled with these gods. It's great fun. Simply put, a pyramid is the grandest tomb ever created, and the builder's job was to get it finished before the pharaoh died. In modern times, we use the expression, life is a journey, and while that is certainly true, these guys took it to a whole new level. The ship from inside the Great Pyramid was for Khufu's journey to the afterlife. Pyramid building was a very large part of the economy in those times. This societal lifestyle benefited from temperate weather, a very fertile land along the Nile where crops grew easily and aplenty. There was plenty of food, there was law and order, there was nice weather. What's the problem? But most likely, pyramid one-upmanship and high costs doomed the concept, and pyramid building ended around 1525 BC. We were very pleased to finally get to see these pyramids up close and personal. Well, we engineers are fascinated as to how the pyramids might have been built. The pyramids exist, they are real. Aliens were not likely to be involved. But there were no beasts of burdens, only human power. So how was it done? We're still waiting for a believable answer. The math of building the Great Pyramid suggests awesome design and management skills. Imagine cutting, delivering, and placing a 2.5-ton stone every 20 seconds with only human labor. Nothing else on the planet can compare. You know, it's possible that the builders never recorded how it was done, so as to not give the tomb robbers any help. The casing stone remains on the face of the Great Pyramid. It was polished white limestone. As impressive as the pyramids are today, when fully cased in white limestone, it had to be breathtaking. It is believed that the missing casing stones were carted away over the centuries for use in other works. The pyramids all had a capstone too. This one is from a smaller pyramid. The Great Pyramid is said to have been topped in a gold capstone, and that's probably why it was never found. Someone got rich off of that job. There's some serious climbing involved going into the pyramids, and the day after climbing up into the Great Pyramid, my legs were screaming at me, but I'm so glad I did it. By the way, the restaurant that Anne is sitting in has a fabulous location right across the street from the Sphinx and the Pyramids of Giza. Notice her themed rice pile? Well, of course, we had to have a shadow picture with the pyramids. We lucked out with the sun angle, and the canvas went up on our wall a couple weeks after we got home. Love it. So this is a story that's long fascinated me. An artist named David Roberts did much to open up the Middle East to Europeans and launched the beginnings of historical research and early tourism too. He was already an accomplished theatrical scene painter, but in 1838 he traveled to the Middle East on his own nickel to capture the scenes he had heard about from others. There were no cameras at this time, remember, so his fantastically detailed drawings excited Europeans like no other descriptions of the region could possibly do. His works endure to this day, so let me share some of those renderings with you. Robert's lithographs are unique in that they provide exceptional detail of scenes at the time. Much has happened since then, but these renderings provide a touchstone for anyone involved in restoring these sites. Abu Simbel is a massive temple at Aswan built by Ramesses II. Egypt cleared the sand and opened it for tourism many years later, only to have the Aswan Dam project threaten it, along with many other treasures along the Nile. More on that next, but naturally we had to have a selfie. But you can see all the fantastic detail that Roberts included in his illustrations. When the Aswan High Dam was built, many temples were to be sunk. Needing the power and the flood control, Egypt approved it, and with the help of the Russians, construction began. It was a sort of a famous project when I was a kid. UNESCO rushed in to save some of the temples. I remember chipping in a few dimes at high school during a collection to help the cause. It turned out to be a good investment. The entire temple was disassembled and raised 200 feet and moved back from the Nile. It's worth the long journey just to see this amazing sight. As you see, Roberts captured the temple in fantastic detail. I never thought we'd actually see the place, but there we are. Really a great experience. Restoration work is constantly going on up and down the Nile at all the historic sites, and Roberts' renderings are helping. Modern-day air pollution is said to be impacting these old structures, but we know something about the effects of air pollution here in Los Angeles. Egypt is doing a fantastic job of preserving these ancient sites. Many are open at night and feature well-placed lighting to emphasize the carvings. Here again we see how humans in the renderings give comparative scale to the structures. And here I have to make an observation that came to me 50 years ago or so when I saw the first Roberts lithographs. In many of the scenes he captured people in the ruins who had probably lived around them or maybe actually in them all their lives without knowing where they came from. The ruins are so common in this part of the world, and there were no records of how they were created or by whom, so maybe the local people at the time thought they were just nature. If that was all you saw around you every day, you might think this is how the world is. Don't know. I'll keep researching and try and find out what Roberts thought. Yes, we have to remember that cameras did not exist, so Robert's work is all the more remarkable and important to Egyptology. Try to imagine what Europeans thought when they saw these images of mysterious sights for the first time. After the pyramid inflation I joked about, Egypt's kings chose to be buried in what is now called the Valley of the Kings. This is how it looked when Roberts visited in 1839. Although there had been some looting over the centuries, many tombs were hidden and intact, untouched for thousands of years. Then, Englishman Howard Carter, the original Indiana Jones, comes into the story in the period after World War I to make great discoveries. It was here in 1922, after 7 years of searching, that British archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the fantastic tomb of King Tutankhamun. The site is beautifully preserved today, and we were able to visit both the Tutankhamun and Seti I tombs. Here we are in the tomb of King Tutankhamun, or King Tut as he's commonly called. The tomb is fabulously displayed and lit. It's cleaned, not restored. Just amazing. Yes, the remains of King Tut are still there, and I do mean remains. Apparently his mummy took quite a beating when the burial mask was removed. The mask was quickly moved to the Egyptian Museum in about 1924. And remember, we went to the Egyptian Museum just days before this visit to the Valley of the Kings. So, we had a small dust-up at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Anne was so focused on the mask that she missed a few signs telling her no photos. So the guard stopped Anne and demanded that she erase her photos, which she did. But of course, erasing is just a word on the iPhone. So that wonderful photo is hers. The mask is said to be the most famous piece of art of all times. The backside is pretty impressive too. Now, I was going to be cremated, but now I'm thinking, yeah, I want one of these. We would need many hours to share all the photos and stories we have, but just know that there's much to see and new finds are happening yearly. It's an amazing. Just last month, or I should say in September, an archaeologist unearthed 27 coffins in another pyramid. It goes on and on. Okay, let's talk about Egypt today, or at least what I believe are the big issues the country faces. Cairo is a mess. Building for 10 million people has been out of hand for many years, creating a nightmare to fix, if that's even possible. People are actually living in these complexes that you see. Many have no utilities. This is just a typical scene shot from the bus as we race through the city. I have no idea how this might get sorted out, but something has to happen. They can't keep doing this.
Flea market. Welcome to Egypt. Welcome to Egypt. Incredible density, incredible crowds. This is the real people of Egypt. Yes, the vast majority of people here. The real Egyptians.
Well, here's a wow for you. Okay, from that to this. We were living large for the entire trip, and we had this view from our room. Pretty nice, huh? We tripped around the nicest tourist spots in Giza and Cairo. This mosque could have been used in a scene from the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Pretty impressive. And there was an imam singing there as well. Any shade of black you want, and some zingy numbers on the second floor. Yes, there's quite a struggle between the traditional Muslims and their youth. No surprise, it's happening all around the world. We had a lovely view of the Nile from our hotel. The city looks and is modern in many ways, despite what we saw earlier. It's crowded, it's colorful, and very foreign. A&K took us to the best neighborhood with nice shops and stops and restaurants. And our security guard was always checking out to make sure that our backside was protected. Great fun, felt very safe. It's all so different, but in the end, Egyptians are just people pursuing life, and kids, as you know, are the same pretty much everywhere. I love this picture of these little guys. So let's talk a little politics, briefly. Back in 2011, the people voted for the first time and selected Mohamed Morsi as president. Yippee! Well, he immediately started to Islamify the government, rejecting the secular path that Egypt had been pursuing since gaining independence from Britain. When the leader of the Islamic group that slaughtered 58 tourists in Luxor was given an important new post in Morsi's government, it was too much. So, General Assisi from the army executed a coup later that year. So Egypt now has a benevolent dictator, and he enjoys very good support from the current White House. If that support fades, there could be trouble. Islam is always there, lurking, and many conservatives believe that any government must be based on their interpretation of the Quran. That spells trouble. As you know, Islam is an extremely conservative faith, and it's been jokingly described by some as the Islamic time machine. It'll teleport you back to the 7th century one way. I don't think it's a question of if, but rather when Islam will rise up and attempt to take over Egypt. It may come from the outside, but there's plenty of demand internally too. Hoping for the best. The population of Egypt has been exploding. Yes, the birth rate is in decline, but the last 10 years point to great stress in coming years. We mentioned the housing issue, but feeding all those mouths is a bigger challenge, especially when housing is being built on their best farmland. Now think about it. This poor country already depends on imports for 60% of its grains. They have tried to build cities away from the Nile Delta by providing irrigation to those locations, but so far that's not been successful. And the U.S. election news has buried a real story that will confront the world very soon. Have you heard about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? So our election news has drowned out this story, but it's very serious. Ethiopia is building a new dam fully within its borders, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? Well, the river happens to be the Blue Nile, and it offers major benefits to Ethiopia's primitive economy in both irrigation and power generation. But the Blue Nile also feeds both Sudan and Egypt, and that means much less water to those countries, especially while the Ethiopian dam fills, and continuing with lesser flow after that. There's no agreement on how fast Ethiopia can fill the lake behind the dam, or how much water they can use for irrigation long term. They may see it as our water and do whatever they want. Obviously, this dam could destabilize Egypt during any drought. It's a big concern. 93% of Egypt's water comes from the Nile, so the Ethiopian dam is an existential threat to Egypt. You can look at the data and you can see that not only do they have less water, they'll have less power generation from the Aswan High Dam, which is critical to Egypt. The White House fears that Egypt might move quickly to use military action to resolve the matter if an agreement is not reached. And Egypt might do it before China can mobilize to help Ethiopia's military. This could unleash a massive Middle Eastern war, but Egypt cannot risk waiting, or so many believe. The lake is filling. Stay tuned, because Egypt has got to have the waters of the Blue Nile. Incredible. So is Egypt safe for tourists? Well, Egypt has a tourism product that is unmatched, and it's a major part of their gross domestic product today, but security is indeed crucial. After the slaughter of 58 tourists at Luxor in 1998, Europe's tourism dropped to zip, and they've had a long recovery. Then in 2011, there was the revolution. You remember Tahrir Square, and the unrest dropped tourism again, so that in 2011 was a pretty grim year. Then there was the Metrojet bombing, and Egypt struggled to recover from that. But many believe that if they can maintain security, tourism could double. That's a big deal. So General al-Sisi, now President al-Sisi, put a lot of effort into keeping the tourists protected. We felt very safe, and we used the best touring company to make sure that was the case. Here's some interesting factoids to understand more about Egypt, by the way. The Suez Canal is their biggest source of income, drawing fees that are 15% of its GDP. And notice that 51% of the population is under 25, but unemployment in that group is 30%. So this gives you some ideas of the kind of problems Egypt is facing. So back to the matter of safety, security is pretty intense. They work hard to reassure tourists without frightening them. Again, we felt safe throughout the trip, and A&K made sure we were not exposed to any danger. And by the way, we saw several examples of how respected that badge is the guy wears. People know not to mess with these security guards. I should point out that Al-Sisi also has a massive intelligence organization that works to find troublemakers before they can strike. This is essential in that part of the world, and I suspect that some bad people simply disappear. But Egypt can't afford trouble. Ann and I like small group touring. It's more costly, but we get better treatment than being in the crowd, so to speak. A&K does a lot of line jumping that goes unnoticed to assure customers' time is well used. And you're guaranteed to meet some interesting people. This trip was no exception. And of course, we made it with our global travel buddies, Rick and Joan Schmidt. Egypt is a long way to go, so I suggest you include Egypt on a wider trip through the region. Now, our trip started with a week in Greece to see Rick run the marathon. Yep, that's the original, from Marathon to Athens. Then we took a lovely tour of the Peloponnesian Peninsula before heading off to Israel, where we spent the weekend before flying to Cairo by way of Athens. Yep, getting directly from Israel to Cairo is a bit difficult, but welcome to the Middle East. So would the Harts go back? Yes. We would like to see the new Egyptian Museum in Cairo for sure. Now, will we go back? Probably, but we have more places to see first. Should you go to Egypt is the big question. Our answer is yes. If you've never been there and can afford to go first class, you should. For sure, it's a highlight of our travels. It was the very best. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. And I put this video on a YouTube site, so if you want to view it yourself, you can, or share it with others. Bye-bye.
Yes, the vast majority of people here, the real Egyptians.
And we were told to stay away from that area, and we did, I can tell you that.